Guns pointed at a black mother cradling her bleeding child. The cops saw a threat. They didn't see the bullet came from their own gun. They were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. The Saturday air in Oak Creek, Georgia, was thick and sweet, tasting of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass. For Dr. Imani Hayes, it was a rare moment of perfect peace. The crushing weight of her work as Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division felt a million miles away. Here, she was just Mom. Her 10-year-old daughter, Zoe, skipped ahead on the sidewalk, a constellation of strawberry ice cream freckles dotting her nose. Her bright yellow sundress, the one with the little embroidered daisies, fluttered around her knees like a captive butterfly. "Mom, did you know that a group of flamingos is called a flamboyance?" Zoe chirped, turning to walk backward, her own scoop of chocolate ice cream held precariously. Imani smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression she saved for these moments. "I did not know that, my little genius." "Where did you learn that?" "Mrs. Davison's class. She said words can be like magic." Zoe giggled, a sound like wind chimes that Imani wished she could bottle. They had just left their favorite local spot, the Scoop, and were taking the long way home through the historic district, where ancient oaks draped Spanish moss over the quiet streets. It was their ritual, a sacred pocket of time carved out of Imani's demanding schedule. It was everything. They were 2 blocks from home, passing the ornate, wrought iron fence of a corner property, when the magic shattered. It wasn't a boom, like a firecracker. It was a sharp, vicious crack that ripped the air apart, followed by a sickening thwack of metal on metal. Imani's blood ran cold. Before she could even process the sound, Zoe cried out, a short, sharp gasp, and crumpled to the ground. The half-eaten ice cream cone rolled into the gutter. Imani's mind refused to connect the dots. A fall? A trip? Then she saw it. A dark, wet stain blossoming on the vibrant yellow of Zoe's dress, just above her hip. It spread with terrifying speed, a crimson flower blooming on the fabric. "Zoe? Zoe, baby, talk to me." Imani dropped to her knees, her hands hovering, afraid to touch, afraid not to. Zoe's eyes were wide with shock, a tear tracing a clean path through the ice cream on her cheek. She didn't scream, she just whimpered, a soft, animal sound of pain. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Imani's heart. She ripped a piece of her own blouse, pressing it against the wound. "Help!" she screamed, her voice raw and unfamiliar to her own ears. "Somebody help! My daughter's been shot!" Windows opened. Faces appeared behind screens. A man watering his lawn froze, the hose dropping from his hand. But no one moved toward her. They just stared, their faces a mixture of horror and a kind of distant, removed curiosity. The silence of her neighbors was a second wound, a terrifying confirmation of her isolation. She gathered Zoe into her arms, the child's body feeling terrifyingly limp. The yellow dress was now soaked, the blood warm and sticky against Imani's skin. "Please," she sobbed, rocking her daughter. "Somebody, please help us." The wail of sirens sliced through the neighborhood's paralysis. 2 police cruisers tore around the corner, tires screeching as they fishtailed to a halt just feet away, their flashing red and blue lights painting the tranquil scene in strokes of garish chaos. For a split second, relief washed over Imani. Help is here. The relief died the instant the doors flew open. 2 white officers, their faces grim and set like stone, emerged. They didn't move with the calm urgency of first responders, they moved with the rigid aggression of soldiers entering hostile territory. The taller one, whose name tag read Miller, had his gun drawn before his second foot hit the pavement. The other, Cole, mirrored him instantly. Their weapons weren't pointed at some unseen threat in the distance. They were pointed directly at Imani. "Police! Drop the child! Put your hands where I can see them!" Miller's voice was a harsh bark, devoid of any question or compassion. Imani stared, bewildered, still clutching Zoe. The world tilted on its axis. What? She's hurt. She's bleeding, she needs an ambulance. I said, put the child down. Now. Cole shouted, his knuckles white on the grip of his pistol. They weren't seeing a mother holding her wounded daughter. Imani realized with a sickening lurch what they saw, a black woman, covered in blood, holding a child. In their minds, the equation was already solved. She was the threat. The source of the violence, not its victim. Tears of rage and terror streamed down Imani's face. You think I did this? She needs a doctor. Please, just look at her. From a nearby porch, a screen door slammed. An older man with a ramrod-straight posture and a weathered face strode onto his lawn. Hold your fire, officers, he yelled, his voice carrying the unmistakable ring of authority. It was Mr. Henderson, a decorated Vietnam vet who had lived on the street for 40 years. I saw the whole thing. She didn't do a damn thing. That shot came from your direction. Miller barely glanced at him. Sir, get back in your house. This is an active crime scene. He turned his attention back to Imani, his gaze hardening. Last chance. On the ground. Imani couldn't move. She wouldn't. She would not lay her dying child on the dirty pavement like a piece of discarded evidence. She hugged Zoe tighter, trying to shield her with her own body. She's all I have, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't you dare point those guns at her. Don't you dare. Her mind, the sharp, analytical mind of a federal prosecutor, was screaming, trying to fight through the fog of a mother's terror. Protocol. De-escalation. Identify the victim. But there was no protocol here. There was only raw, unfiltered prejudice staring down the barrel of a gun. The standoff stretched into an unbearable eternity, a tableau of fear and flawed authority. Officer Miller took a half-step forward, his weapon held steady. The air crackled with the imminent possibility of a second, even more catastrophic shot. Imani's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat counting down the final seconds of her world. Just then, a third cruiser screeched to a halt behind the first two. A different kind of officer emerged. Officer Elena Ramirez, her expression focused and analytical, took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance, the aggressive posture of her colleagues, the terrified veteran on his lawn, and the black woman on her knees, clutching a small, bleeding child in a yellow dress. Her eyes widened. Miller, what are you doing? Ramirez's voice cut through the tension. She kept her weapon holstered, her hands up in a placating gesture. What is going on? There's a child hurt. Stay out of it, Ramirez. Miller snapped, not taking his eyes off Imani. It's a developing situation. Suspect is non-compliant. Suspect? Ramirez took a step closer, her voice laced with disbelief. She's a mother holding her daughter. Look at her. This isn't procedure, Miller, this is a powder keg. Stand down and call a damn ambulance. The brief argument was the only distraction Imani needed. Her training, her identity, the core of who she was, finally broke through the paralyzing fear. Her grief was a cold, hard stone in her chest, but fury was now afire. She wasn't just a victim. She was a warrior. With excruciating slowness, every movement deliberate and broadcasted, she shifted Zoe's weight slightly. Her right hand, shaking but resolute, moved toward her back pocket. Don't you move. Cole barked, tensing. Imani ignored him. Her eyes, no longer pleading but burning with an icy fire, locked onto Miller's. She pulled out a small, black leather wallet. She didn't flip it open. She didn't present it. She simply let it fall from her fingers. It hit the pavement with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the sudden, profound silence. It lay open on the asphalt, the late afternoon sun glinting off the gold shield embossed within it. The seal of the United States Department of Justice. "My name," Imani said, her voice low, steady, and vibrating with suppressed rage, "is Dr. Imani Hayes. Your bullet hit my daughter, Zoe. And you were about to execute her mother for it." The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Miller and Cole stared at the badge, then back at her face. The aggressive certainty in their eyes dissolved, replaced by a wave of confusion, then dawning, sickening horror. The power dynamic on that quiet suburban street didn't just shift. It inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. They weren't in control anymore. The sight of the DOJ shield shattered the scene's terrible momentum. Officer Cole's gun lowered an inch, then another. Miller stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief, the weapon feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. It was Ramirez who broke the spell. "My God," she whispered. She immediately keyed her radio, her voice urgent and clear. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. Shots fired at my location, civilian child injured. We need an ambulance, code 3. I repeat, a child has been shot. And notify the chief. Now." The 10 minutes it took for the ambulance to arrive felt longer than Imani's entire life. She never let go of Zoe, whispering reassurances, stroking her hair, even as paramedics swarmed them. They were efficient, professional. They were everything Miller and Cole had not been. As they loaded Zoe onto a gurney, a paramedic gently tried to guide Imani away. "Ma'am, we've got her." "I'm not leaving her," Imani stated, the words forged in steel. She climbed into the back of the ambulance, her blood-soaked clothes clinging to her, her gaze fixed on her daughter's pale face. At Oak Creek General Hospital, the world became a blur of antiseptic smells, fluorescent lights, and hushed, serious voices. Zoe was rushed into surgery. A police captain, a portly man with a nervous sweat on his brow, arrived and found Imani in the desolate quiet of the surgical waiting room. "Dr. Hayes," he began, wringing his hands. I cannot express how sorry we are. This is a terrible, tragic accident. Officers Miller and Cole are distraught. We will handle this internally, I assure you." Imani slowly lifted her head. The tear tracks on her face were dry, and her eyes were like chips of obsidian. The panicked mother was gone. In her place sat the Deputy Assistant Attorney General. "Captain," she said, her voice devoid of heat but colder than ice. "Your window for internal handling closed the moment your officer's bullet hit my 10-year-old daughter while she was eating ice cream. Your officers chose to see my skin, not her wound. They chose accusation over aid." She stood up, a commanding presence despite her disheveled state. "You will secure the scene. You will turn over every second of body camera and dashcam footage, unedited. You will surrender officers Miller and Cole's service weapons for federal ballistics testing. You will not conduct a single internal interview until a team from my office arrives. Is that unequivocally clear?" The captain paled, stammering a response. But Imani had already turned away. She walked to a secure hospital office that had been cleared for her. She pulled out her encrypted federal phone and dialed a number in Washington, D.C. "Director, it's Imani Hayes," she said, her voice perfectly steady. "I have a situation in Oak Creek, Georgia. I'm declaring a Section 242 violation. I need a federal fly-in team. And I want them here by sunrise." The storm had been unleashed. The courtroom 3 months later was a pressure cooker. Every seat was filled with reporters, activists, and concerned citizens from Oak Creek. Outside, protesters held signs with Zoe's smiling face on them, chanting, "Justice for Zoe." At the defendant's table, Miller and Cole sat stiffly in their suits, the swagger they wore with their uniforms gone, replaced by the pallor of fear. When Imani Hayes took the stand, a hush fell over the room. Dressed in a sharp, dark gray suit, her cornrows intricately styled, she was the embodiment of composed authority. She began to speak, her voice clear and resonant. On the afternoon of August 16, she began, making eye contact with the jury. My daughter Zoe and I were walking home from an ice cream shop. She was wearing a yellow dress. She was telling me that a group of flamingos is called a flamboyance. We did nothing wrong. Her voice caught for a fraction of a second, the only crack in her armor. And yet, we became the targets of those sworn to protect us. The prosecution played the body cam footage. The jury watched in stunned silence. They saw the scene through Miller's eyes, the shaky, aggressive approach. They heard his dehumanizing commands. They heard Imani's frantic pleas and Zoe's faint whimpers. They saw the DOJ badge fall to the pavement. A young woman on the jury put a hand to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. The defense attorney tried to dismantle her. Dr. Hayes, you were emotional, correct? You did not immediately comply with the officer's commands. Imani leaned into the microphone, her eyes locking onto his. I was a mother watching her child bleed to death on a sidewalk. The only non-compliance was my refusal to treat her like a piece of evidence instead of a human being. The chaos that you describe was a chaos of your client's own making. They never asked a single question. They just drew their guns. But the final, devastating blow came from an unexpected source. Officer Elena Ramirez took the stand for the prosecution. She looked directly at her former colleagues as she spoke. This wasn't a one-time mistake, she said, her voice shaking but firm. It was a culture. The department received at least 3 prior complaints against Officer Miller for unnecessary escalation in minority neighborhoods. They were all dismissed after internal review. We were informally taught to see certain parts of town, certain people, as inherently more dangerous. It was wrong. I was wrong not to speak up sooner. The defense lawyer, desperate, asked Officer Ramirez, why are you doing this? Are you seeking some kind of promotion? Revenge? Ramirez looked past him, her gaze finding Imani's. Because I have a son, she said simply. And I swore an oath to protect and serve everyone in this community. Not just the ones who look like me. If it were my child lying on that pavement, I would pray that someone, anyone, had the courage to tell the truth. The courtroom was silent, absorbing the weight of her words. It was no longer just about one stray bullet. It was about an entire system on trial. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. The air was so thick with anticipation it felt hard to breathe. Imani sat in the front row, Mr. Henderson on one side, a now civilian Elena Ramirez on the other. She reached back and squeezed the hand of her daughter, Zoe, who was sitting behind her, a faint scar visible above the collar of her new dress. The forewoman, the same young woman who had cried during the body cam footage, stood and unfolded a piece of paper. On the charge of reckless endangerment and misconduct in public office against defendant Michael Miller, we the jury find the defendant guilty. A collective gasp, then a wave of applause and sobs, swept the room. On the charge of failure to intervene and obstruction of justice against defendant Daniel Cole, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Miller dropped his head into his hands. Cole stared blankly ahead, as if he couldn't comprehend the words. Imani didn't cheer. She closed her eyes, bowed her head, and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 months. She turned and pulled Zoe into a fierce, protective hug. Later, in the hospital room, Zoe traced the scar on her side. "Did we win, Mommy?" she asked, her voice small. Imani smoothed her daughter's hair. "Justice won today, sweetie," she whispered. "And that's a win for everyone." The case sent shockwaves far beyond Oak Creek. The Department of Justice placed the entire police department under a federal consent decree, mandating a complete overhaul of its policies and training. Inspired by the events, the state legislature passed a sweeping police reform package, which the public quickly nicknamed Zoe's Law, requiring mandatory de-escalation and implicit bias training for all law enforcement officers statewide. Weeks later, standing before a bank of microphones, Imani Hayes looked out at the sea of reporters. She wasn't there as a DOJ official, but as a mother. "My daughter is alive today by a miracle of inches," she said, her voice steady and strong. But a community's safety should not depend on miracles. It must be built on a foundation of trust, accountability, and equal justice under the law. She paused, looking directly into the main television camera. "This was never just about my daughter. It's about every child who deserves to walk home safely, to eat ice cream, to be seen as a child. Justice isn't a destination, it's a constant, difficult journey. And it requires all of our voices." This story is a painful reminder of the work that remains. Share it to keep the conversation going. And in the comments below, please be respectful of all perspectives as we discuss this. Comment respect. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter.